No, we're getting there.
I'm going to record. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. My name is Megan Williams, and I'm the Director of Support Services at Alzheimer Group. AGI is a non-for-profit organization, and we provide services and programs for people living with dementia and their families. Today's lecture is made possible thanks to the generosity of the Lindsay Memorial Foundation. We are pleased to have two guest speakers from the CIUS Centre West, Carolee Honeywell and Naomi Berkowitz. And they're going to talk about your guide to home care services in the placement process. I'm going to have them just introduce themselves directly. And I do want to put the disclaimer again, as I said before, they are going to specifically talk about their CIUS. There are some differences with the CIUS on the West Island and in other areas. And we can talk a little bit about some of those differences maybe a little bit later. And when in doubt, try to call the CLSC in your area and speak with a social worker. So please go ahead and we will begin, and let me know when you want me to change the slide. I'm just gonna make sure they change. There we go.
Perfect. Certain. So I just wanted to reiterate, just to piggyback in terms of what you were saying, I think in addition to the fact that CLSCs and CIUS can be different, there also can be a difference based on each particular situation. Because what we're going to talk about today are the generalities and not specific situations, because obviously there's an exception to every rule. We do try and personalize services as much as possible, even as it relates to placement, but we'll try and answer questions as specifically as we can. Do you want to say what you need to read?
I'm Naomi. I work at the MAH, which is the organization division of the government that oversees the request for placement and the placement themselves. So as Carolee was saying, what applies with regards to different CLSCs, the same applies when it comes to the MAH. Different territories have different MAHs. For the most part, they are run in very similar ways. There are a few exceptions. I do need to share that our CIUS, we have the mandate for the Jewish population. So that becomes a little bit different, and I'm going to be explaining that a little bit later, how the priority system works for people that are Jewish, that want to come into the Jewish centers. That is going to be explored a little bit later, but we're going to start first with CLSC. You can change the slides.
Perfect. Tell me it's going to work. Just there we go. The disclaimer. Do you want me to?
No, we're good.
Next slide.
Good. All right.
So basically when you're talking about maintainable, there's a variety of services, everything from ASS services, which is direct care. And that could be from everything from hygiene assistance all the way up to, turning someone in bed, repositioning, respite blocks, etc. So in terms of the everything that influences the number of hours you get is the context. So the context varies. So one context could be that you're waiting at home, you think you want to plan for the future, so you're on a wait list for a bed, but your needs aren't urgent. Well, then it's our regular offre de service. But should circumstances change, it can be increased at any time if the caregiver is in distress, or the caregiver has certain medical situations that can arise, and the priority changes. In that case, one of the things that all CLSCs try and do is we try and avoid people having to go to hospital or situations of last resort. So in that instance, sometimes even in any circumstances, we can spike services for short periods of time. So that means we can go outside our offre de service if it means preventing someone going to hospital in critical situations. So that's where things can become a little bit more complex, but also a little bit more helpful to families. I think the other context is in terms of putting in intensive services when people are coming out of hospital to avoid people's being placed in hospital. So just so you know, priority placement doesn't just exist from hospital. It can be part of a discharge plan that you maintain a priority in the community and then access increased services while waiting for your bed. But again, that service intensification, the context is key because we can blow the budget a little bit if we know it's for a finite period of time. But when you're talking about long-term ongoing needs, you're talking about a variance where each CLSC has a different budget and can max out at different levels. At our CLSC, generally speaking, you're heading towards the maximum of our services when you're hitting the range of 28 hours, and that's across all 5 sites. So our CLSC covers a territory of NDG, Benny Farm, Côte St. Luc, Park Extension, Côte des Neiges, and Westmount downtown, part of downtown area. So that's how big our COS covers, and that's roughly what our range is. Other CLSCs will have different ranges. Those ranges relate to the budget that we have and the fact that and the proportion of seniors in a population. So I'll give you an example. Sometimes I've heard on the South Shore that they actually go quite a bit higher than that, but that may be because their population of seniors is lower and they're able to, you know, have a higher off de service. Does that answer people's questions, generally speaking, in terms of services? And of course, that doesn't include all the professional services that are available. A key component is having a social worker in terms of case manager, especially if you're looking at future planning. I always say people should talk about placement early and often because it's very important. 9 times out of 10, people don't know what the intention is of the person. And we want to look at of finding the right timing for you. Because I think a key comes, oh, sorry. Oh, can you change the slide?
Yes, please.
So just to let, I kind of eased into that one subtly. So one of the key components is, and one of the reasons I say talk early and often about placement, it's kind of like talking about finances, talking about advanced planning and advanced directives, talking about organ donations. These are all things we all hope never will happen. I don't think anybody says, I hope that when I'm 87, I'm in placement. That's not a conversation or a dream people have. But sometimes life takes us down certain paths where caregiving and being at home is no longer an option. And I think it's very important that as families and as each individual, we have conversations with our loved ones, whether it be a sister, a child, about a brother, a friend, about what our plans and what we would want and under what circumstances we want this option to be explored.
Okay.
And I think it's also very important that caregivers talk about what their limitations are in terms of caregiving, because it's fine for someone to say, I want to be home as long as possible. But if for the caregiver, you know, they can do a lot related to physical care maybe, but for them, it's harder and more psychologically demanding when it's about an approach or mentally draining aspects of caregiving. So each person has a different tolerance. That's why there's not a lot of judgment in the system. A key component to look at is when, well, this is one of the benefits of home care, one of the few, is we're efficient when it relates to one particular form. That means the same evaluation that you have on an annual basis as a client is the same core evaluation for placement. So that means it's not a matter of, it's a matter of updating something versus starting something from scratch. And one of the benefits related to that is that it also generates now a scientifically validated score. And that gives us an indication of what level of care you qualify for. So part of the dialogue is some people will have very clear ideas of, I'll accept placement if it's at resource X, like say a nursing home. But the person has to qualify for that level of care for that to be considered. And this evaluation will tell you and be able to be a regular review of where you're at in that range. So roughly the range of SMAP scores, or what we take into consideration, of anything between 0 and 6 is in the range of community services. So community services can either be home care through your CLSC, or it can be services related to RTF, which is a private, like it's a family type resource in the public or private system. 6 to 9, you're looking at a range that takes you into the neighborhood of ressources intermédiaires, and 10 and up, you're talking about CHSLD, or what we commonly reference as nursing home level of care.
Carolee, can I just ask a
Yeah.
question?
Please.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a different format. So people who have their questions, please put it in the Q&A or the chat, because I can't unmute you in this format. However, you mentioned a few things, that when caregivers are in distress, sometimes you can increase the services temporarily. So, you know, sometimes caregivers don't want to sound like they're complaining. Sometimes they don't want to admit that they're not able to continue on, or they're having a difficult time. What suggestions would
caregivers are really great at taking care of, caregivers are great at taking care of other people, less great at taking care of themselves. And I think part of that is where having an ongoing rapport and regular contact with your case manager is key, so they can get to know and also signal what they're going to see as signs of change. So keep an idea of any change you're noticing in your own capacities, whether it be sleep patterns, in eating patterns, because if you're noticing a change in your quality of life, that's the opportunity to share that change. Because when your case manager is coming in to check in on the loved one, they're also going to check in on the caregiver. So it's very important to take kind of a pulse of where you're at. And there are other options that I think are really underutilized. And we talked about services, but there's also respite stays that I think offer a great opportunity and can be regularly used, because the best cure is prevention. And prevention in terms of having regular respite stays can be life-changing for people. And a respite stay is where a loved one stays. These beds are only in nursing home because we have to be able to accommodate any type of care needed. So it might not always be a match for the right level of care of your loved one, but what it allows for you to book is a stay of, let's say minimally, you're probably looking at a few days, at least a week, and then can go up to several weeks. And if you do that a couple of times a year, you're actually taking good care of yourself, because it's a marathon and not a sprint caregiving. And so if you have regular moments throughout the year where you recharge your batteries by taking advantage of respite, it can not only give the loved one who's in respite the chance to experience what care is like and what it's like to live in outside the home, but it also recharges your batteries and lets you keep going. I think that's a key component and something that people often don't look at. There's also Alzheimer Baluchon, who has services where someone will come to the home and give that also respite in-house.
Yeah, and there's also another organization for the Maison Gédicale, where they do have some temporary beds that's not directly through the CLSC. There's a question just in terms of, you were talking about the scores, the 0 to 6 and the 6 to 9.
Yeah.
I think it was just different levels of care. So what does SMAF actually, what's the acronym? Because a lot of the viewers don't know what these acronyms, the MAH and the SMAF mean.
Remember what I written as? I'll tell you what the score is. Basically a description. It calculates the person's level of independence with their ADLs, that's activities of daily living, and instrumental activities of daily living, IADLs. And it's a clinically validated tool that was developed by the University of Sherbrooke. It's clinically validated for a senior population in particular. And what it does is basically it takes the data, the way you answer the questions about where someone's having an incapacity, not how it's compensated for. So it doesn't take into consideration necessarily how the caregiver, or if there's a resource in place, it looks at what the profile of that care receiver is. So and it generates a score, those numbers that basically have been clinically validated to tell us if someone is likely to deteriorate and what kind of their complexity of care is from a physical health standpoint and a cognitive health standpoint. That's a rough vulgarization of it.
Okay.
And if you want to go to the next slide.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just, one last thing, and I will write some of the resources
course.
down in the chat. But one other thing, in terms of respite, because you were talking about respite places. So is that all through the CLC, your caseworker, if you want to do a temporary respite
It's
bed?
through your, correct. So if you want to use a temporary respite bed and even Alzheimer's baluchon, CLC has reserved hours also, so that you can take advantage of, certain amounts of time with them. And you would go through your case manager, and it actually, in terms of reserving the beds, is a very similar process of going through a centralized body who can tell you what the bookings are. It's called the Emma Ash that Naomi works out of, and they can tell you what's available, when it's available, and for how long.
Okay.
Because you probably want to try and match where it might be near love in your area.
Perfect. Thank you very
So
much.
one of the things we had was, one of the questions we wanted to ask was also, can the CLC help inform you about placement options, public versus private? I think this, in terms of giving specific private recommendations, we don't do that because it's not, we can't, while we have a rapport with certain RPAs, résidences privées in our area, we don't have, because it's a private organization, it's the same way we don't recommend caregivers particularly to people, we don't recommend private resources. But there are placement agencies like Vis-a-Vis who have a global perspective, who are nonprofits, who can give you, help find the appropriate private resource. But your case manager will also tell you if they don't think it's a good idea to pursue private. Because I think sometimes people think,
Oops.
sorry about that.
Okay.
Sometimes people think that private is better than public. And I think it really depends on each person. And I think that's where part of the placement process, people always jump to the forms and getting in and getting the application done. But the real important work is in the counseling and in the preparation, because that's where they can try and help tailor the resource, your options, and understand what your needs are. And the case manager can consult and should consult with the Emma Ash, that's the coordinating body of the beds, because they really are experts in knowing what the resources are and what the subpopulations are of a particular resource. And by that, I mean, a place might not be officially Italian, Greek, Portuguese, or Anglophone, but they may do very well at receiving clients from certain backgrounds. And they may have enough of a population that perhaps it might be a good match. So very often they can help with that background, because understanding what resource options you have to take into factor who the person is, who the family is, what their preferences are. In addition to location, I think location is a key factor for many people. But also there are also more subtle indications of how urgent is your need, because your options may be narrowed by your circumstances. Someone who's doing well at home and can afford to wait, we actually don't even recommend doing placement as a preventative. A lot of people think, oh, it's important to get on a wait list, and if I'm on a wait list, I don't have to worry. But being on a wait list is stressful. And I'm telling you, no matter how prepared you are to receive the call that a bed is available, it's anxiety provoking. And even if you had it planned as a just in case, when you get that call, it kind of raises the anxiety, creates a lot of stress of should I, shouldn't I, when will I get the call again? If you're not ready, don't do the application. Because when you are ready, you can do the application for the resource that's right for you and right for your circumstances. That's the bottom line in terms of what we recommend for pursuing the application. But it doesn't stop you from doing a lot of homework and really working with your case manager in terms of planning for the future. Outside of COVID times, it's possible for us to arrange for you to do tours of certain places so you can really see, because on paper, two places can be very similar in their approach, in their mandates. They're all staffed similarly. The difference is in the culture and the feel of a place. And that doesn't translate just based on the facts. That's something you know when you walk into a place, if it could potentially be a home.
Okay.
So I think we're looking at yeah.
Just a few, just because I think it's relevant. If someone wanted an immediate placement because of something that happened, you were mentioning that sometimes you
Like
didn't
an
have all of the
unforeseen
options.
death, you know.
Yeah. What happens in that case?
I think I'll let Naomi share with you a little bit just
Okay.
from her experience of the Emma Ash, what happens.
So like Carolee was saying, when you're planning on doing the application for placement, it should not be as a safety net. It should be because you're ready to accept a bed if a bed becomes available. Sometimes there's a little bit longer delay than others, and sometimes there's circumstances that come up that are emergencies. The communication that the Emma Ash has with the assigned social worker is vital, because it's your key person to be able to tell us what's happening, when there's a change, when there's an urgency. There's a very big difference between a need and a want. You're a little bit less available because we're working on what the need happens to be. So we're trying to address the safety and the security of everybody that is involved, while trying to recognize the fact that we have somebody that is going into some type of a setting that is going to need to be cared for. We want to make it as best of a match as possible. Although sometimes in an emergency circumstance, we really have to take a look at the need over what the wishes are, kind of like a priority list of, you know, what you would like out of a center. It ultimately comes down to where can the person get their needs met as quickly as possible.
That's why it's also important to have a backup plan in place and talk about things of, you know, if someone relies on it, because most people who are caregivers we're talking about in caregiving situations are family members. It's family who does the bulk of caregiving that people receive. And in that context, it's key to say what your emergency plan would be. Because if something happens suddenly, God forbid, we've seen situations where the caregiver has a heart attack, where the caregiver is suddenly ill, where the caregiver is incapacitated. The last option you really want is for two people to be taken in an ambulance, because you know the care receiver is not going to get optimal care in an emergency room. It doesn't exist. So in that context, it's really key to have a plan where you may, if God forbid there's an emergency, this is the place, this is the number you call. We've already had a contract. We've let them know that if we call, it's pre-approved, we'll do the service if X person or Y person calls. There's measures you can set up in place for the immediate. The CLSC will also help in the immediate. We can't necessarily put in 24/7. We've done it exceptionally if, like I said, there's a sudden illness or God forbid death, and we know family is traveling in from out of town, we'll do whatever we can, because obviously we want that person to be safe, but sometimes we have no other option but then to ask ambulance to pick up both. But in COVID times, that's a lot less likely. And so we do try and intensify services to protect people, but it's always better if you have a long-term plan in place, even if it's a family member who says, God forbid there's an emergency, I will come over and be there, because either way, it's very confusing and stressful for this care receiver to either be with a stranger for long periods of time or to be in that circumstance. So having that backup plan of what would you do if something happens is key.
Yeah, and
So
unfortunately,
one of the questions people,
sorry, go, well, just on that, sorry to interrupt, Carolee, unfortunately, some families don't have access to a backup plan because, you know, family lives long distance caregiving. And I know that.
But the family who lives long distance, but the long distance wouldn't be the circumstance. Sometimes people, like you said, you're talking about the care receiver and the caregiver are the only two people in the situation. Mm-hmm. That's where the CLSC can step up and will step in. But when there's family members out of town, right now, a lot of things can be done at a distance by contacting an agency and just having those resources available. And again, a case manager will give a family member and say, listen, we've already called this agency. They provide service. They're known to your parents. We provide services through them. If you need to call them now, they might be able to keep that worker there for the, for the next few days. But you have to gauge what that option is and what that looks like. Because sometimes that's the difference between you're having to take whatever bed is available, whether it be in a francophone, institution that's completely out of your neighborhood, or having a plan that can be put into place for a week or two can make a difference for having maybe expanding the criteria of what can be offered to you.
Thank you.
So I think
to
one of the
change the
key
slide?
components to look at is, yeah, yes, please.
Okay. I think we talked about this.
I think one of the things, one of the questions we have is, how do you know when it's the right time to accept a bed and then it's offered for placement? I think you have to know it was the right time before you did the application, because I think the reality is it's very normal to get that sudden feeling of cold feet and nervousness and anxiety and say, should we, could we? But that's a process of counseling that should happen before the paperwork happens. I think sometimes even as workers and clients, everybody puts the focus of being on a list. The list isn't the actual solution. The real solution is going through the work of, how am I going to talk to the person about placement? How do I tell them that they're leaving on the day? Because what people panic about at the last minute is exactly that. It's, how am I going to say this? How are we going to get the person there? I'm not ready. You'll never be ready for placement. If you believe that you'll have a moment of saying, now's the time, it means things are really bad and the time was probably last week. It's very rare you have that kind of clarity and that kind of reflection, because it takes a lot of space to create that reflection. It's something that really, that's where the counseling and the preparation in terms of talking about future planning and put things on the table comes to play. And then we can really help you feel as comfortable as possible. And I think you'll know it was the right decision after you're there. And I've Naomi and I have worked also in nursing homes and in resources where we receive people. And very often the biggest reaction you get is, I should have done this sooner. It is 9 times out of 10 the reaction, because people have an image of what this does versus a reality of how this changes. Do you want to change to the next slide?
Hold on 1 second. This one? How to address the challenge if family members are not in agreement of placement?
Yeah, it's huge. Because part of it is also, I think that's where the social worker can play a key role in helping animate family meetings. Though Zoom was a delay for us, we can invite you through Teams and we can set up family meetings, even from a distance, of values, and also a different perspective based on who the key caregiver is. Sometimes someone who lives from out of town and isn't as involved in the direct care can feel a sense of guilt about living out of town, and that can amplify their desire to try and really make things work at home as long as possible, because they anticipate placement as being a change and something that would be difficult for the person. But they don't always have that same perspective, seeing for the forest for the trees. Sometimes the reverse is true, where it's the person who lives out of town who comes in and says, whoa, what are you living in? This is crazy. This is really hard. How are you doing this? And that kind of fresh perspective can be helpful. So I think the biggest key is implicating in tense situations, because sometimes families can have conversations about difficult topics on their own, and sometimes they need help. And sometimes it might be a caregiver that's feeling that their needs aren't being recognized, that it's only the care receiver's needs that are being considered. And in that case, having a neutral party or sometimes having their own worker can really help level the the playing field. Because as a caregiver, every caregiver has the right to say, I can't do this anymore. And we can't impose that on people. No one has the right to impose it on you. And I think that's where sometimes we even have to have 2 social workers involved, one for the caregiver and one for the care receiver, because their interests aren't always the same. And that's where the CLSC can really help kind of navigate both the legalities of who is the decision maker and then how to settle conflicts. I don't know if you want to change to the next slide.
Yeah.
This is a hot
So-
topic.
So I think one of the things that we need to mention is when the request for placement is made, like Carolee was saying, that should be the last result. Everything else was tried. But when the request comes in, we still recognize that we're talking about an individual. The individual themselves, the one that needs to go into placement, they still have rights. We need to be able to take a look and say, who is the person that put in the request? Is the right person signing on their behalf? There's a difference between somebody that is considered apt and somebody that is considered inapt. Many times we are dealing with people who are not of possession of the capability to understand their situation, to understand substitute decision maker. We need to take a look at who the person is and what the circumstances are. If there's a major conflict within the family, we send the dossier back. It has to be resolved. What we want to avoid is a refusal. There are consequences to refusals. Technically, in an ideal world, there would be no refusal. Everybody is on board. They put in the request for placement, a bed is offered, and the person accepts the bed. But that's not the reality. Sometimes the head and the heart conflict comes into play. You've tried everything, you've kept the person at home, very desperate. You've chosen the center of choice, and then the phone call comes to say that a bed is available. Not only that the bed is available, the admission is within 24 to 48 hours. That's where panic ensues. The time when a bed is offered is not the time for the family to have a discussion about, are we going to take the bed or not? Your emotions are highly charged at that point in time. It should just be the next step in the plan that was put together with the social worker. The consequences of refusing the bed, if somebody is hospitalized, there are no consequences. Okay, they are not considered medically stable in order to be admitted. Nothing happens from that standpoint. If somebody is in the community and the bed is refused, they're removed from the wait list, and you have to wait a minimum of 3 months before reapplying. And the process is starting all the paperwork from anew. It's an extreme, rare situation when a bed is refused and they're kept on the waiting list. And when they're priority, it signifies that they're not ready for placement. Now, sometimes the family is ready for placement, but the person themselves are not, whether they're apt or they're inapt. There are different venues that need to be addressed from that way. And sometimes it does have to be an actual legal court order to remove somebody from the home and put them into placement. If that needs to be done, that would have been explored prior. That's when Carolee keeps saying, communication is vital. Communication within the family structure, communication with the social worker.
So the cost?
Yeah.
I'll let you do that one.
Okay, sorry, if you want to just change
Sorry.
slides.
Yeah.
Just kind of moving
As
around
we do
here.
again.
So the public placement is not free. The government, every January, they change the prices. There are public rooms for 2, and there are private rooms. So your prices are going to range more or less from about $1,600 a month to about $1,900 a month. This would include, at those with the SMAP scores that are higher, it includes the food, it includes the medication, it includes incontinent briefs. It basically is an all-inclusive, with the exception of, television, telephone, very minor details from that perspective. If somebody is going into, you are responsible for more things to pay. So you do have to pay for your medication. You do have to pay for your incontinent briefs. We recognize that not everybody is in a financial position to be able to afford the fees designated by the government. Every public site has somebody that can help you apply for what is called an exoneration. It's where you're asking the government for a reduction in the fee. There's a difference between not wanting to spend the money and not having the funds to be able to cover it. So if you're applying for the exoneration, which could only be done once the person is officially admitted, you're going to be asked to supply certain documentation. But the key point is somebody's global net worth really shouldn't be more than 2,500. And you're going to have to show your income tax returns. You're going to have to be showing your bank statements. There's a lot that have to be presented, and the government will then determine if you're eligible for reduction, how much. The question comes about, well, what happens if they have a home? Or what happens if there's a spouse? Well, when you have a spouse, you have to take a look at the fact that there are two people that still need to be looked at in this scenario. And that you shouldn't have one person losing out at the cost of the need for somebody else. So there are some areas, some exceptions, but if it's somebody that is living alone and they own property, the expectation of the government is that that property is sold and that they are paying for the service that they require. Each case is looked at and upon admission that you would be able to address that with the admission person at each site.
I think the only other thing I want to add to that is, not to be embarrassed to have a financial discussion with a social worker in terms of what will the impact be, because sometimes people have to do some advanced planning in terms of looking at downsizing an apartment or looking at costs to allow for that. And I think that's why planning is key, and that, like I said, the conversation happens early and often, so nothing is a surprise.
So can I ask a question about that, if you don't mind?
Sure.
Because a lot of people, when you own a home and your loved one has to go into long-term care, a lot of spouses are concerned that they have to sell their home. They have to move to an apartment. And as you said, they take into account both people, right? So there's something, sometimes people are recommended to get an involuntary separation. Is this something that you want to speak about? Because it's a home that brings a lot of change, having to move and having to now all of a sudden be physically separated from your loved one is they're hard transitions. And what are some things that can be done in this case?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing to remember is that the home is a joint asset. So both have to be benefiting from it at a certain point. And obviously, in terms of involuntary separation, it can sometimes be applied for that would allow you to increase, like people can increase their revenue. So by that, I mean, if someone is on basic pension and full supplement, with an involuntary separation, they could be recognized as needing additional sums because now they're living on their own because they're living separately. But in terms of the whole analysis of assets, and to say in this circumstance they'd accept the of your house, another one they wouldn't, we can't speak to that because each individual situation is going to be very different. But it is that it's the couple and the person in care should not be deprived of having access to their resource to support their care. But I think it's also to take a look at the reality is government does subsidize all placement beds. We're talking about the actual cost of these resources is probably way closer to thousands of dollars a month versus the amount being paid. In private, for sometimes less care, you're paying $5,000 to $6,000 a month for what you're paying for in the public system. And it's just to factor that in, that there will be a cost, but we're not going to say how much your cost would be or what your unique situation would be, because I think that really has to be assessed and discussed individually.
Thank you.
So if we go on to the next slide. So when a placement request is made, there are certain documents that are required. So the SMAP assessment that Carolee was referring to, or a variation of, there's a shorter and longer version of it, that needs to be completed and it needs to be up to date. That needs to be accompanied by a document that is filled out by the physician. Over and above that, specific assessments that would be required. There's a lot of consents that need to be done. What needs to be very clear is that everything is showing us the true picture of the individual. Sometimes we have discrepancies on what the doctor is writing as to what the CLSC worker is supplying to us. We don't just ignore that. We delve further. So this impacts when people are asking, how long does it take in order to get the application submitted, and then how long until somebody goes on a wait list? That's a very simplified way. It can take sometimes several weeks for the social worker to be able to complete their required assessment. Sometimes there are changes, and that's what is spurring on this, the need for placement. Sometimes there's a delay in having the physician complete the documentation. Without all of the information that we require, the evaluation will not even be looked at. So there could be delays in accessing the information, delays in sending in the information, and then further delays if the information is conflicting. So once that information is sent in, it's usually within a very brief period of time, which we can say brief based on how urgent the request is. Some of the requests can be treated within 24 hours, the request for placements. Some of them, it could be several weeks before they're at least evaluated and officially placed on a waiting list. When it comes time to exploring placement, part of the difficulty is there's no absolute timeframes that could be given for anything. Everything is in real time. So you're waiting for the assessments to be completed. You're waiting for the assessments to be sent in. Then you're waiting for the assessments to be evaluated. And then you're waiting on a waiting list. So it is a lot of waiting. Priorities change. Okay, they change. Everything that we do when it comes to placement is looking in real time. So as important as everybody's situation is to them, we have a responsibility to take a look overall. We look at priorities based on the request that the social worker may have submitted and saying that this is an urgent request. Sometimes it's not considered an urgent request, but when we assess it, we determine that this is a situation that is, if it stays in the community, we have one, possibly two people going to hospital, which we want to avoid. So again, it loops back to, you have to always be ready for that call to come, which is difficult enough. And when we add to it the fact that there's no time frame, we can't give any time frame. When you talk about the level of care, like Carolee had said, there are different levels. The intermediate resource, what is considered long, gear the care towards a specific level. And this is where choices of where somebody wants to have their family member go to, it has to follow the flow of what the needs are. What setting is best going to meet those particular needs? So you may want them to go to a particular center, but that might not be where their best level of care could be met. So sometimes you're able to be able to say, I would like center A, and the social worker can say, but they don't fit the criteria for there. That's something that can be done when you're putting in the request for placement. You're discussing what your options are. Where is the person able to go? Sometimes we get a request And we make a decision and saying, based on the information that we see, and it could be because of their physical care, it could be because of the cognitive impairment, it could be because of behaviors that we see, it could be with the type of intervention that may be required. We at the Emma Ash may decide to be able to change where the level of care is for that person. It's all about looking at the individual, what are their real needs, and broken down into those three main areas, and how can we meet those needs. One of the distinctions that we have, like I had said initially, we have a mandate here at our Emma Ash in the CIUS Centre-Ouest for the Jewish population. We have 2 Jewish sites for long-term care, which is Maimonides and Jewish Elder Care. And when it comes to choices, you can still use the option of the level of care, and if you want a Jewish setting or you want a different setting. However, when you're in a situation of urgency, if you are insisting that you have to be in a Jewish bed, you have to be prepared that it could be either of those. You can't insist that I only want one particular setting. It becomes a need versus a want. When somebody is in a more urgent situation, they'll go where the bed happens to be available, and they can still be waiting on another waiting list. This is whether you're talking for the Jewish mandate or not. When a bed becomes available and you're in the community, if it's urgent, then we look and seeing how we're going to be able to accommodate. If a bed becomes available and you can't continue to remain in the community, you still have choices you could make. So you can go into one facility while have the person remaining on the wait list for another facility. But what happens is they're not considered urgent anymore because the situation itself, the urgency is resolved. You may not be in the facility that you would like to have your family member in, but they're safe and they're in an environment that could meet their needs. Very big distinction between when you're choosing a center and then when it's a little bit more urgent. If somebody happens to fall unwell and unable to continue in the community and the person goes to hospital, they can, again, that same concept can be applied. They go to what is called a transition bed. They will go to a bed while waiting for a bed in another setting, the one that is of their choice. When you're in that transition bed, it's usually 1 year at least before you're able to be eligible to go to your private, your primary choice. That 1 year is not 100% set in stone, but that is the only realistic time frame that we are able to say. On any given day, we can have tens of requests for replacements, moving up to 30, 40 requests per day. Everybody has to be looked at in an equitable way. So when we're looking at placing somebody, we're looking at their needs, we're looking at the choices that provide somebody with the setting of their choice, so long as it matches what their needs happen to be. It can sometimes become very difficult when we talked about refusals. Well, people will say, but that's not the place that I wanted my family member to go. Again, it comes down to the need versus the want. The important part is that the person is safe and getting the care that it is that they require. If somebody is in hospital and they are not able to return home, it's very different for someone that is in hospital that temporarily can go home while waiting for the bed that's available. Caroline mentioned about some of the services that are able to be put in place from the CLSC. You can still get a priority in being in the community, whether you are coming and waiting from home after having been discharged from a hospital. Sometimes it can be just a priority from home, but sometimes not. Sometimes the issue of priority, it's not deemed to be evaluated as being so urgent that somebody has to go in immediately. The other factor that we have to take into consideration is there are only limited number of beds. As many beds as we have, and as urgent as the situation can be, if there's no bed available, unfortunately, we cannot do a placement. This is where the partnership with the CLSC is vital. We want to avoid a hospitalization. We want to admit people from home as much as possible. We want to give people as many choices as possible. But sometimes our hands are a little bit tied and we just have to go with what is the safest for the person.
And I think one of the things I wanted to just add to that is, we don't talk about having an Anglophone mandate. There are Anglophone resources, and Anglophones do have the right to service in their language. And I think the challenge of that comes to the context. That means you always get to choose the resource of your preference. That doesn't matter where you want to go. You can choose a resource as long as it's in Quebec and say, I want to go to place X. That's your first choice. But that doesn't mean that first choice will always be available when you need it. And that's where the concept of the transit bed can come to play. So Anglophone resources, we have quite a few in our territory. But I know the West Island has a little bit, and there are outside options also off the island of Montreal. And I think one of the key components to remember is you always have the right to where your final destination, where your home will be. Your first choice is always respected, and that's protected by law. But in the interim of where you go while waiting for it, whether or not you need a transit bed is really based on your circumstances. Your circumstances, if you're in hospital, is that you have to leave that hospital when you're medically stable, and either you'll be able to go to home with a bump up in service and wait for your first choice, or you may not. Sometimes when you make choices, that's why getting that information and speaking about it ahead of time is really key. I'll give you an example. Very often children want their parents to be close by to them. And very often right now, a lot of the Anglophone community lives on the West Island, wants a resource in the West Island. But those beds are rare beds. Because when the government was building a lot of these places, the land that was cheap was in the East End. It's not in downtown, in the East End. And so that's where that side of Montreal is a bit disproportionately represented in terms of placement options. And the challenge for our community is really, even when it comes to Francophones wanting to stay in the neighborhood, they don't have the same options because the resources are less. They're based on what resources exist in the territory.
Megan, if you just want to do the one last slide.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so we can't hear you, Megan. No, we can't hear her.
Is it over?
No, I muted myself. I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
I just have a few
there
questions
we go.
afterwards, just to ask you based on what you're saying,
Okay.
but go ahead and then we'll do it at the end.
Okay, so a big question that people ask all the time is, I live in a different territory than my parent lives. I want them to come to my area of town. Am I able to put in the request for that? The answer is yes, you can. There are, of course, rules because the government always has measures that are in place. So again, in our CUS here, we have the Jewish mandate. Anybody that is a Jewish person wanting to go to a Jewish facility will be able to get some form of priority in coming into Jewish elder care or Maimonides, regardless where they live. If you have somebody that is not looking at the Jewish centers, you have the right to go anywhere. If I have a family member that I want to place and it is in the territory that they live, then it is in that territory, they're going to get their transit bed and they're going to get their permanent bed. They're going to stay in that area. If it is in a different CUS, but still on the island of Montreal, that environment, wherever that it is, they are going to be responsible, okay? But their permanent orientation, they're going to be considered the lowest level of priority. They're on the, no, so they are not considered the priority. The reason for this is that we can give services, we can give care, we can place somebody. The priority is always for the people of their own territory. So you can always go on the wait list, but it is going to take longer to get to your permanent orientation. There are a lot of finite details for both on the island and off the island, but you will not have priority for that. That's just trying to put it in a nutshell.
So what would
Go
you,
ahead, Megan, if you have any other
Yeah.
questions, because we're trying cognizant of.
is that the last slide? Was that the last slide? That was the
Yeah,
last
because
slide?
we're
Okay.
just aware of the time. and-
Yeah, so let me
a little
stop
late,
share
but-
so we can actually see each other. So thank you for that. I think a lot of that question about territory is, it's hard, right? And the wait list is also hard. Just in terms of the transition beds, if someone moves into a transition bed, you had mentioned give or take about a year, expect about a year. Does that mean that their priority changes, and if someone's still living in the community, they would have more priority because they're in a safe place?
So their priority does change when you're in a transit bed. You end up going further down the list, but I do have to say that the majority of the time, when somebody is offered permanent location from their transit bed, they usually don't take it. It's the idea ahead of time. I only want my family member to be in a particular setting, but that setting is not available, and their family member settles in. And then you have to ask the question, what is the benefit to the person? A bit of an easier time at adjusting to placement than others, but after 6 months, 8 months, 12 months, what is the benefit from uprooting the person when they've settled in, they're somewhat oriented within the environment, people are familiar to them, the routine is familiar. What would be the benefit? So the reality is very few people end up moving to their permanent orientation. You have the option, but few do.
And go ahead.
And the one time frame, just to add to that, is that's really particular to a territory and particular circumstances. There are specialty resources like Santa Cabrini, like the Chinese hospital, and those have much longer wait lists because again, it's targeted to a community specific, and it can be those waiting times when you're talking about very specialized locations or places can be longer.
Okay, thank you. And one kind of last question, if someone is in a private residence because they only have funds for say 1 more year, and they're on the wait list, are they not seen as priority because they're under kind of some type of supervised care?
No, but it is very important if somebody's funds are limited and they're able to project a time frame. It is vital that that information gets shared with their worker, who in turn will notify the MAH, because we take that into consideration. We can't just manufacture beds because somebody needs the bed at any point in time for whatever the reason is. But when we talk about the priority, there are all kinds of circumstances. So if we have an idea that somebody has maybe 6 months that they're able to manage, we're not going to start looking on the 5th month for them. We might start touching base with the worker around month 3 to say, how are things going there? Are they still under the same projected time frame? And so we may end up being able to offer a bed in the 4th month or the 5th month. There's no way for sure to guarantee, but being in a private resource does not mean that they don't have the same rights when it comes to the priority. Not at all. They're still considered in the community.
Well, I want to thank you. I know I didn't have a chance to ask all of the questions, but I am aware of the time. I think some of the takeaways are, having getting a social worker involved, having conversation early about this process, you know, having this emergency plan, kind of working through, you know, lots of guilt, need versus want. And don't be afraid to ask questions. I think that one of the challenges that we hear a lot of families say is that they have a hard time establishing relationships with their case manager or their social worker, because of course there's a higher turnover sometimes. But I would suggest that families advocate and do whatever it takes to start to build that relationship. AGI, we're here to also help support families, so please give us a call. And if you would like more of this presentation, or you have more questions, you know, I know that Naomi, we talked about maybe doing a part 2 later on, maybe working out some of the tech glitches. And I appreciate everyone's, you know, it's a little bit stressful, but thank you so much for the presentation. There will be the recording that will be sent out. And if you have any questions, just feel free to contact AGI and I can try to have your questions answered by the experts. So thank you so much, everyone. And I wish you a wonderful day. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.